Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Brian E. Roach.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I am joined once again by my cohort, my colleague, my partner in crime, my brother from another mother, the host who doesn't like toast, A1, Mr. Brian E. Roach. What's going on, Brian?
It's a lovely day. It's not raining for once in the last, 900 years, so I'm happy.
Yeah, it seems to be a thing. I know you're over in Jersey. I'm in Ohio, so it's just kind of it's nonstop. I mean, when do you even get to cut the grass? I mean, you can't. The thing's soaked. So I'm just glad, as much as I'd like football season to be here, if they played in April, can you imagine? Because I already hate, cold doesn't bother me. I think that's one thing. I think fans could agree if you go to a game in person live, you could bundle up, you could put on layers, you could take off layers. But if you get wet and cold is like the worst. That's the nightmare. But wet is just miserable. And then you go back to your car and then you have to wait in traffic to get out. And then, you're sitting in the game if it starts raining at the very beginning. So I'm trying to think if there was a game last year where it poured, or it was maybe the year before, but it was like right at the tail end. And I kind of had a feeling, I don't know, the Weather Channel app or whatever that alerts you at 3:38, rain will start in 5 minutes. So I'm kind of looking at my watch. It's starting to sprinkle a little. I go up to the corridor, pouring down rain. There was only like a minute or two left in the game, so it's not like I missed anything. I think it was already in control or whatever. And it's just like, haha. But wait a minute, I still have to walk to my car at some point. But luckily, I didn't get drenched that game. But that's just the miserable. You agree with that, or are you a hot, cold guy? Does the weather bother you, like in December, to go see a game, or are you with me with this?
I know this is going to make your jaw hit the floor, and you're just going to be flummoxed. But I'm in 100% agreement with you.
Wow, are you a polar bear? Or would you go?
I am a polar bear.
You are. You would go into the freezing lakes then?
When everyone is old and says they're going to move to Florida, and I already am old, I want to move to Alaska.
Yeah, well, you know what, though? You ever see that movie? What was that called? Insomnia? Where was that Robin Williams and he couldn't sleep because all they have is daylight there? I don't know if I could do that. I think Alaska's beautiful otherwise. I would love to know if we have anyone in Alaska listening to the show, too. That'd be really cool. Drop us a comment or something on social media, the website. If you're listening on YouTube, drop a comment, because that would be really cool to find out. So,
I'd love to visit Alaska. I don't know that I want to live there for that very reason. But, the great Northwest, I'm good with that.
I had an opportunity to work up there, as some people who've listened before know. I officiate another sport, and it's soccer. So I know some people are just like, shut off the show. You can't have a soccer guy talking about football. Well, I wear many hats. I had an opportunity to go up to Alaska, but I didn't work. I had something else going on, like a wedding or something. But I could have went up there, and I had a buddy who did, and he said a moose was on the field, which was they had to stop the middle of a game in order to kind of escort a moose. I guess they just walk around like deer or anything else that you would see in the Midwest. So, crazy type of stuff. But anyways, I digress. We have a very important, well, all of these topics are important. We're breaking down all of the Steelers position groups. Today, we're going to flip over to the defense. We already talked about the quarterbacks. Thank you, everyone who tuned in and listened to that. That's a hot button topic, too. We have some transactions, too, because Brogan Roback no longer with the team. He was replaced by, his last name's Devlin, isn't it? So I got to look at the transactions now.
Last name, first name, I don't know. One of his names is Devlin.
I hope it's not two last names type thing, like Sutton Smith. This is absolutely crazy. So, Devlin could be a last name. Devlin Hodges. That's what it was.
That's two last names.
Yeah, he was but I'm still going to pull for him. He's one of these guys, I like outside of the Power Five, like the big, the ACC, SEC, Big Ten and all that. I like MAC players. I like seeing players come out of the FCS. And this FCS guy, pretty much every single thing that you could think of, FCS or otherwise. Walter Payton Man of the Year award, he won that too. So from Samford University, by the way. So
yep.
He's going to be coming to camp. So that's a little bit of an update on the quarterback stuff. We had a lot of movement here because there's an offensive tackle, Damian Prince, linebacker, Tuzair, a skipper, defensive end, Henry Mondow, and a defensive tackle in Greg Gilmore. They also signed free agent wide receiver Johnny Hilton. In that process, they released one of the outside linebackers, former 7th-round pick Keon Adams, a defensive end Jay Hayes, a defensive tackle Chris Nelson, offensive lineman R.J. Prince. Feel bad about that one. He was a real nice guy. Brogan Roback, the quarterback we were talking about, and wide receiver Karan White. Also, all those guys are gone. So they also released Matt McCrane and cornerback Jack Tacho from the AAF. So I had to mention that as part of this because we are talking about cornerbacks, and as we're looking at this, we're going to be talking about another AAF guy that was signed in in Cameron Kelly just last month. But we're talking about depth. We're looking at the overall position of cornerback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'm going to kick this off by saying I have a very good feeling about 2019. This could be the best group they've had, maybe since they've been to the Super Bowl.
I believe that I agree with you. This is, you know what? The world is ending. We're agreeing on too many things. I actually think I agree with you. This is the first time in many years where I felt like we had some level of comfort at the corner position. And while I'm not going to, we're going to break this down a lot further. I don't know that where I rank them, but I feel like it's a much more secure and stable and probably more talented than it has been in a long time. And you could very well be right since the last time they went to the Super Bowl.
Well, this is the reason I say this. The 2010 Steelers roster that played the Packers lost in the Super Bowl, and here's what it looked like. So you had Will Gay, you had Bryant McFadden and Keenan Lewis were the entrenched starters. Will Gay was kind of the, kind of extra guy. Will Gay was floating around. He went to the Cardinals and then came back to the Steelers too to finish out or close out his career for the most part. And then a stint with the Giants just shortly thereafter. But, a lot of people think different whether Will Gay was good or bad, kind of like Ike Taylor early in his career too. It wasn't like maybe you didn't have all the good feels, I'm going to say, with Will Gay. And he used to really irritate me. And then he became like the guy who almost broke Rod Woodson's pick six record. So that's something to hang his helmet on. But Keenan Lewis, I think everyone thought Keenan Lewis was, fantastic corner. And then they couldn't afford to keep him. He went as a free agent. He left town and went to his hometown in New Orleans before knee injuries and everything kind of derailed his career. Let me see who else is here. Bryant McFadden, a friend of ours here at SU. We've had him on the show a couple times. Also very solid corner. Anthony Madison, not much of a career there, just a few years here with the Steelers. Cresden Butler was a rookie. Let me see. I think that's 5. Oh, Ike Taylor was still around too. My bad.
He was.
So Ike Taylor was there too. So you're looking at Keenan Lewis, Ike Taylor, Bryant McFadden, and Will Gay as your top 4 corners. Looking back on that, I'm sure the people in 2010 would, if you went back to there, you'd be like, oh, these corners are terrible, you know what I mean? But it's still, this is a defense, and especially in 2008, with a few of these names carried over from that squad, too, that won the Super Bowl. We were talking about this in the back rooms as being like, these were stellar defenses. These were like record-breaking defenses. For one reason or another, obviously, when you have the GOAT, Troy Polamalu, and we're not really talking safeties today, just we're focused on the cornerbacks. I look at the 2019 roster with the cornerbacks that are here, we're going to go through here in a second. And I honestly, I'm looking at this almost the same way. As crazy as it may sound, the Steelers have gone through, let's help fill in some of the blanks here with guys they've traded for, picked up off of waivers, or, signed otherwise that was, one man's trash, another man's treasure. You had Antoine Blake, Valentino Blake, as he had to change his name and go into witness protection. He gave up over 1,000 yards that one season. I mean, it was just, it was tough. It was real tough for him. Hit like a truck though. Who else was one of these stopgap type guys? You had, because you had Will Gay on the one side for quite a few years. So there was just a rotation of Blake, Who's the guy who got Cortez Allen? I was going to say
Allen.
the guy who got the contract instead of Keenan Lewis, because Keenan Lewis was already gone and they didn't want to lose Allen. Allen lost his confidence and he kind of fell off a slump that we're hoping Artie Burns doesn't follow that same pattern, but it was looking that way last year in 2018. Bryce Mccain. There's another one, a 1-year type prove-it deal, and then left and made some money elsewhere. And I believe he was, with the Titans and Dolphins. And I'm not sure he's with anyone yet. I have to look him up. I'm not even sure if he's still around. But maybe one of the better corners that has been there off of this list. And I know I'm missing someone else. What was it? Cortez Allen, Antoine Blake, Bryce Mccain, and Cody Sensabaugh, yet another one, and Ross Cockrell. So there's several names there where, they were trying to get guys in the draft. By hook or by crook, they wanted someone, maybe they weren't on the board, and then they kicked the can, and you had somebody like a Duran Grant come in. They couldn't really make the regular season roster or actually get any playing time. He may have cracked the roster, got, maybe once his rookie season, maybe. Later on, you had Senquez Golson, who was just snake bitten and could never get on the roster either due to a variety of injuries. So now we're looking at the Steelers here in 2019, and got to go with just what they've done so far. You got a free agent that they picked up in Steven Nelson. You've got the veteran that they picked up a few years ago that was very much needed signing in Joe Hayden. It was like a gift from the Cleveland Browns, releasing him at the end of their training camp. And I look at those top two, and we could throw Mike Hilton in there too as like a slot corner, and I start to get some vibes of that 2010 team. I don't know if you're going to agree with me quite so much on that one, but I kind of like where it's going versus all those names I said, like Cortez Allen or Bryce McCain or, God forbid, Valentino Blake.
I need to see the guys play. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with Joe Hayden. Joe Hayden is having a resurgence in his career. Joe Hayden has been, I think most people would agree, the best corner they've had in a long while, and I don't see a reason to expect that to drop off now. So from that standpoint, I think Joe Hayden is probably a better corner than either Brian McFadden was or Ike Taylor, and probably a better corner than they've had since then. Although I'm an Ike Taylor truther, even though he had the hands of stone. When Ike was in his prime, man, he covered everybody, and he was a shutdown corner. He just couldn't catch, unfortunately. But when I think about what we've got now, Steven Nelson I follow him on Twitter. I love the fact that every day it's like rise and grind, man. He's a worker. He's clearly in it to win it, as they say. And I love the motivation that he shows. I think we have to see how they pair up. I really want to see the communication that occurs. It was much better last season when Joe Hayden was in there. We all saw that when Joe Hayden missed a game, communication in the backfield was tougher. But we're talking about a group now that of all the defensive backs, we're talking about guys who've been there other than Steve Nelson. So they should be able to adapt him. He's a vet. He should be able to get in and come in with his feet on the ground and ready to rock. I'm pretty comfortable, which makes me nervous. Being comfortable makes me nervous. I don't want to be comfortable. I either want to be extremely confident because then I'm just being dumb, or I want to be uncomfortable.
Well, and it's not to say that Pro Football Focus, I think they had Hayden in the top 32, which was crazy. I don't know. Sometimes we talk about their voodoo witchcraft, and I don't have voodoo. all of voodoo for sure, that they come up with. And Joe Hayden passes the eyeball test for probably all intents and purposes. Does he have the moments? Yeah, here or there. I absolutely hate that Do you remember this NFL commercial? Like they had one with the Immaculate Extension and then Aaron Rodgers, Hail Mary, and they show like the fan video that, the videos people were posting like Twitter and stuff like that. And they splice them in to show, you need to be here in the moment in the stadium. And then they showed one with the Houston Texans game that was played on Christmas, a season removed, where they got walloped because they didn't have a quarterback and half their team was decimated with injuries. They got walloped by the Steelers, and the lone bright spot was DeAndre Hopkins, an all-pro, probably, top 3 receiver in the league, making this, circus catch, and Joe Hayden was covering him, and it was just, what do you do there? You know what I mean? It's like Joe forces the quarterback to put the ball in a place where it's not highly likely to be caught, but you happen to have one of the guys who catches just about anything with these large hands and his massive frame, you know what I mean? And it's like that kind of annoyed me. But outside of that, I mean, was Joe Hayden really beat at all? He got punked by the referees in New Orleans on a tacky pass interference call, almost maybe 2. I mean, he was going out of his mind there. He got clocked by Sean Davis against the Chargers and knocked out of a play. Or knocked out of the game, I don't remember. But he was knocked out. and it was just, what else do you don't have a whole lot of bad stuff to say. You have some good stuff to think about with Joe Hayden getting a couple of picks, especially the one against Tom Brady. What else is there to say about Joe? Joe looks like a guy who was kind of born to be a Steeler. It's weird he comes by way of the Browns, but since the Browns, it's almost like that Richard Sherman thing where Richard Sherman gets mad at his old team, the Seahawks, goes over to the 49ers out of spite. Well, I think Hayden was a good fit because he's definitely, we felt if he would stay healthy, he was still a top corner in the league, and I still feel that way. He's definitely the number 1 on this team, and much to the point when we used to have Trey on the show and we would do Trey's Corner, Trey was on IR, for those who don't know. He did sign with the Denver Broncos, so congrats to Trey there. This offseason, that's who he'll be working out with now since the Steelers didn't bring him back. But he was on IR. He got to know some of these guys. You ask him about whether or not they shadow or move around, and that only happens when you have somebody like a DeAndre Hopkins or like an AJ Green. You have to have one of these top all-pro receivers. So Joe Hayden, the Steelers wanting to play more man, as we found out over the years. The zone stuff just wasn't working. The personnel wasn't right to even play man. Now you have Joe Hayden in there, and he's following some guys around, but primarily they like to keep him on one side of the field. Now you flip over to another guy. Now you may be able to just keep Joe on one side and not have to have him shadow anyone to compensate for a weaker corner opposite Joe Hayden. And I think that's where Steven Nelson comes in, gets a tidy sum as a free agent. Maybe not the sexiest name that was out there in free agency, and I know there were some others. I mean, a lot of people wanted a Patrick Peterson trade or a Chris Harris trade. Well, Steve Nelson's younger, by the way, and he was the most targeted cornerback in the NFL last year, and Pro Football Focus, we talk about the voodoo. Don't think of this as like teaching grades, because it's like a 76.2. Anything over a 70 is pretty much an elite player in the NFL, and he had a 76.2 rating in 2018 and a 69.6 in 2017, 64.3 in 2016, so still above average and growing. We mentioned, I think, where his draft placement was. It was probably somebody that the Steelers had their eye on that went maybe a few picks before they took someone else. And, of course, playing against the Chiefs over the last few seasons, they get to see in person what Steve Nelson looks like. And that's usually one of the determining factors is that you're watching a lot of film on your opponents, or you're getting to witness it in person, because it's almost always like somebody gets to be a casualty. I mentioned this with like Alejandro Villanueva, for example, or Roosevelt Nix. Roosevelt Nix was with the Falcons, and they played the Falcons in the preseason. He ends up on the Steelers roster, and they convert him over to fullback. Villanueva, it was like you saw him across the field. The Steelers are always playing the Eagles usually in the preseason, and Mike Tomlin said, I have to have that man now starting left tackle. So this is kind of where I think they were going with. They knew they needed a cornerback in free agency, and they wanted to get somebody who was reliable, but this is somebody that they were already kind of they had their eye on and were familiar with them, and then they pulled the trigger. Now you may not have to, barring anything else that happens. Everyone stays healthy, plays 16 games. They may not have to move around too much. I think that Steve Nelson may finally be the answer, and they may have a few others on the roster too, but we'll talk about that in a second. Yeah,
people are going to complain a little bit. Nelson was ranked by the wizardry folks, who I don't understand what they do. I'm pretty sure there's virgin sacrifice involved. I don't get it. And the numbers they come up with to me feel very arbitrary. I don't want to mock them too much because the professor, is involved to a certain extent, and I respect him. So yeah. I've garnered new respect for Pro Football Focus. But I don't know. It's outweighed because Chris Collinsworth's involved.
Of course.
That immediately downgrades them to me. Anyway, I'm hoping one day the professor can smack Chris Collinsworth for me and take a video of it. That would make me so happy I wouldn't even be able to speak.
It would be that Jerry Maguire scene, where he's cussing everyone out, leaving the office with a box of his stuff. It'd be kind of funny.
Anyway, the point is he was ranked higher than Joe Hayden was last year. Even though, he gave up more yards, but that was because he was targeted, 8 times more than anybody else. And that is, a function of what they had over there in Kansas City. He was the guy that got picked on, but he actually only had a 76.8 passer rating against him. That's not bad. And certainly better than anything we had on that side of the ball, other than Joe Hayden. I don't remember what his number was, but, I can't help but be a little optimistic about this. Obviously, it's May.
Yeah, of course.
The most we've seen is football in shorts from the rookies and some conditioning stuff from the vets. So it's hard to tell, but, it is very encouraging to see a guy who as I said, does his rise and grind every day, looks at it from that standpoint, and is just ready to be a guy that works hard. That is not, and I don't want to besmirch anybody, but that's not what you got. That's not the impression you got when Artie Burns was starting over there. I don't know that Artie Burns doesn't work hard, but I don't, he didn't put it out there that way, the way Steven Nelson is doing. So we'll see. I will tell you this. That's where my comfort starts to erode a little bit, though. Is my top two? The top two I'm pretty comfortable with. I'm starting to feel a little shaky about Mike Hilton.
Really?
And a little shaky about Mike Hilton. It's in many ways, it's just like a receiver, a running back, a quarterback. Second year in the league, did he get better? Or did he not? Did the rush off the side that he did so well with the year before, was it as effective or was it less effective? And I'm not 100% convinced the Steelers are not a little shaky on Mike Hilton as well, because they have not signed him long term. So it doesn't mean that they won't do it. And I'm projecting. Let me just voice this. This is just my opinion, and I'm projecting based on what I see. I'm a little concerned there. Not a lot concerned, because I think Mike Hilton does a lot of really good things. But, again, once other teams start to learn your tendencies, and he was a new commodity in that first season, they can pick those tendencies apart and find ways to exploit them. And it's not going to be a surprise to teams to see Mike Hilton coming off the edge anymore. It's not going to, the things that he may have done well may now be less effective. We have to wait and see. Nonetheless, he's been certainly adequate, if not better than that. But I'm a little nervous about Mike Hilton.
I'm not nervous at all. And there was some chatter about him like losing playing time or something like that. But when you compare snap counts and what the Steelers did, it's not like Cody Sensabaugh took over for Artie Burns. Basically. Sometimes you had Morgan Burnett when he was healthy, kind of coming in and being a dime backer. That kind of took over for some of Mike Hilton's playing time. But overall, like his playing time, for the most part, always kind of teetered anywhere from half the game to about 70%. And with the exception of Week 17, he saw a little less time. He could have been hampered by an injury. He didn't play in Week 4. But, it's not like Cam Sutton was out there playing in his spot. And Cam Sutton was actually playing in Joe Hayden's spot. And we'll talk about Cam Sutton in a second. I did want to talk about, what other name I kind of forgot? You bring up Mike Hilton. Hilton, and we were talking about Senquez Golson, but another guy we haven't mentioned for a long time was Brandon Boykin, another one that was traded for and did not work out. And I mean, he was supposed to be the second coming, and he wasn't. One and done, and outspoken about it as well in the locker room. Pro Football Focus has Steven Nelson as number 33, and some people are probably like, okay, well, there's 32 teams. I don't have the full list of corners here to be able to tell you by position, but as far as their grades, Steve Nelson 33, Joe Hayden 37, Mike Hilton 43. That's not too bad when you start to talk about, okay, well, 2 corners play, so 32 times 2, 64. And then you go with Mike Hilton, he's under that. So they have 3 guys that are at least graded in the top 50 that appear to be their starters. Now, here's kind of the deal with Mike Hilton. I don't necessarily agree. I think part of it is just his being a restricted free agent and stuff like that as to why, they're able to just take this deal and not stretch anything out and then maybe extend or do something after. It might be a wait and see as well. Remember, Cam Sutton was really drafted to be in Mike Hilton's role. And Mike Hilton came from out of nowhere, invited to camp, and was not only a camp phenom, but started week 1 undrafted. It's like, where you been? He was Senquez Golson's teammate over in Ole Miss. So he came out of nowhere, and some of these things do happen. A guy could be a flash in the pan, one-hit wonder, a year or two of greatness, and then kind of, it happens. It's just one of those things. I don't think Mike Hilton is like that. And, I'm not here to promote Pro Football Focus, but I had to look because they had some statistics on Mike Hilton, and no cornerback forced more incompletions from the slot than Mike Hilton last season. His coverage grade was 77.6. That was ranked for 8th. Forced 11 incompletions. He was tied for first. I'm not sure who he was tied with. I'll have to find that out. It may even be Steve Nelson, to be completely honest. His percentage was 17.2 or 17.7%, which was second for forcing incompletions, and he had 12 defensive stops, which was tied for 7th. Now, when you get to Steve Nelson, is very interesting here because not only was he thrown at the most, he was thrown at the most down the field, and he forced as many incompletions, 11. Actually, that's the same number as Hilton, actually. And as the receptions allowed was 17. So 11 incompletions versus 17. It was 54 times 10 or more yards downfield he was targeted. And his completion percentage for that is 31.5, and that led all cornerbacks. So now when you pair him in there, remember the deep ball and stopping the pass and all this was a big problem with the Steelers for many years. You think about Sean Davis, you think about Terrell Edmonds also being a component of this. We already think that Joe Hayden, hey, you don't hear a whole lot from him when you have that with a cornerback. That's a good thing. So you have these 3 guys basically as your starters because the Steelers, they use a lot of defensive back packages, a lot of sub packages. So just if you're wondering and you end up on Pro Football Focus looking this up, they have individual player stats if you look up that are free for people to see. And this is all referenced if you look up the player on Google and then type in PFF and their coverage grade. He has a little gold is this like a little gold trophy next to him? I think it is. So, but that trophy is there. Almost all the same with, these guys. All 3 of these guys are kind of the same. And depending on which article you read and when they do it, they do all kind of different kind of rankings. So some of the top corners, they feel like Stephon Gilmore with the Patriots. We're going to talk about this. Desmond King with the Chargers. Chris Harris with the Broncos, who's starting to age. Kareem Jackson with the Texans. Those are like the top 5. And we're comparing some of these pairs over to other teams. Bears have Kyle Fuller and I believe Prince of Akukamora. You look at the Patrick Peterson with the Arizona Cardinals here, they have as 9th. So I still can't say it. Amukamara, or so, yeah, that's his name.
Something like that.
So, I mean, we were looking at the teams and we're looking at these 3 and we were trying to figure out who has a better 3, a better trio at least. and coming up with some of the names that were there. We've discussed this in the past too, even talking about the draft. The Baltimore Ravens are incredibly deep at corner. They have, I mean, Jimmy Smith looks like he's a bench player now. Tavon Young is their slot corner, and then you look at Marlon Humphrey and Brandon Carr as their starters. The Bengals have always had like some first rounders. They get a little scary outside of their three, but they brought Darquez Dennard back. They have the poster child of Le'Veon Bell, Drake Kirkpatrick, posterized constantly by Bell, and then William Jackson III, who everyone had linked to the Steelers in the draft. The Patriots, I already mentioned some of their guys here with McCourty and Stephon Gilmore. They're very strong there. I look at like the Vikings or the Saints are also very deep too. Was it Lattimore? Eli Apple, and who's the other guy that was starting there too? They're very similar to like the Ravens as far as their corners. The Texans are on the comeuppance. I'd be remiss to mention the Jacksonville Jaguars with Jalen Ramsey and AJ Boye. The Titans have some cast-offs from the Patriots. Logan Ryan and Malcolm Butler. So those are very strong units, but when the Cardinals could even be in this conversation with like Peterson, Alford, who was signed off of the Falcons, and then they took Byron Murphy at the top of the second round in the draft. But that's kind of something on paper that's developing. We said the same thing kind of with the Cleveland Browns because we need to see more. We thought Artie Burns was on the rise and then fizzled out some last year and lost his job. That's where I kind of want to see with like a Denzel Ward. It felt like he was in the right place to make plays and get turnovers when it came to the Browns. What is it? Demarius Randall, I think, is on the other side of him, and then they drafted Greedy Williams. Well, you got to see this all come together. And, of course, you got to see it come together with the Steelers too, but we've already seen two-thirds of it and what it looks like. Steven Nelson is definitely an upgrade for that third spot over anything else they look like. So I guess the question that's posed is not only do the Steelers have one of the better units that they've had, at least right now on paper before any games are played, than they've had in many, 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 many years. They may be one of the top 10 units in the NFL when this is all said and done.
Yeah, I can see that when we get to the end of 2019, we could be looking at a defense that's definitely on the rise, and a cornerback duo or tandem or trio, however you want to look at it, that is in that top 10. Look, this has been said many times, and people will say it constantly. Defensive line play, pass rush, and cornerback play or defensive back play, they go hand in hand. And on top of the fact that that the talent level at corner right now is better than it's been, our defensive line and our outside linebacker rushing, our pass rush is certainly one of the top pass rushes in the league. As a result of that, you're now talking about a group that is going to get more help because of that. They have the potential to get more balls that can be made plays on, find more hurried throws, not have to cover guys over extended periods of time, which is always a problem no matter how good you are. And as a result, those two things going together, I think we could see something pretty exciting this season.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, because the man that Steven Nelson essentially replaces here is either Cody Sensabaugh or Artie Burns, and we saw Artie Burns lose his job to Sensabaugh. Sensabaugh last year, by count of pass rush and the rest of the defense, benefited by having a coverage snap per reception of only 17.0 right on the dot, and that ranks number 7 among all the corners in the NFL. And he also was third lowest in yards per snap when in coverage at 0.64. Not retained. Steven Nelson comes in instead, and you think, hey, the Steelers led the league in sacks each of the last 2 seasons. They seem like sometimes they can't get off the field on third down. It looked like that was kind of turning the corner with the defense. I think Steven Nelson is a real dark horse for when you're thinking about, is this defense returning to, the glory days? And when you think about Devin Bush being added to this roster as well, Mark Barron, I'm sorry, I always want to keep calling him Mark Barron. Mark Barron also is somebody that could kind of fill in and plug in here and is an experienced player. Whether or not, he's a great experienced player that's going to help, if he's going to see the field a lot, or if he turns out being J.J. Wilcox, who they traded for a couple of seasons ago, another name trying to patch some of the secondary. It's all up for debate, but I like where they're at as far as the depth. And I know a lot of people are upset, go right to Artie Burns, the guy who was penciled in as a starter last season, former first-round pick, a tremendous track athlete, somebody that looked like their confidence was shook. Looked like a deer in headlights versus, when he was kind of covering, I don't know, somebody like an AJ Green or something, deflecting some passes. It looked like he was a liability out there, where Sensabaugh was not as much of a liability. Steven Nelson comes in and, fulfills that role great. But that doesn't mean they need to get rid of Artie Burns. Now, it doesn't mean Artie Burns will be on the roster beyond this rookie contract. This is the final year of his rookie contract. They did not option him for a fifth year as a first-round pick. So that means he will become a free agent. It'll probably be like Say LaVie, because the money that's tied in, like Bud Dupree's getting $9.5 million this year under a fifth-year option of that rookie deal. There's a lot of money tied to it, and when they said, well, we're not going to pay you that, he'll probably go somewhere for somebody as a first-round pick, as first-round picks usually do, to see if he's a better fit in a different scheme or system. At least at this point, when you're talking about a component for depth and someone who also plays special teams and is fast, and I don't care what anybody says, in that Chargers game, Artie Burns was not offside when he blocked that kick. That's the kind of thing that he still offers your team, and that's the reason he's going to be coming to camp. That's the reason they're not releasing him right now. There's still enough there to say, hey, we need to give this guy another shot, see what he's got. Even if he doesn't have anything, the risk having a player who's played a lot of snaps, who has an offseason to heal up, maybe better mentally prepare, is better than having nothing at all, or having somebody that's just pulled off the street. When I looked at a lot of these cornerback depth charts, there's so many college free agents, or pretty much the patchwork stuff, like a Antoine Blake or Bryce Mccain or something like that on these rosters, aside from the ones that we mentioned. That's the reason why I have the Steelers in such a higher regard. Even when you look at somebody like the Packers, I know I didn't really mention the Chargers, but Casey Hayward, Desmond King, they're kind of on the comeuppance too. So, but some of these other teams are trying to patch it, or they got some rookies. You're still not quite sure. Are the Browns really that great of a cornerback unit or a great secondary? But they have the potential to be, as do the Steelers. And dare I say, the AFC North may have the best cornerbacks in all of the NFL. So now you start going into the depth, and it's like, why would you get rid of a guy like Artie Burns right away? Let's see him go to camp. Let's see if he could cover people. Remember, he was working out with Antonio Brown all the time. Yeah, I mentioned it. He who shall not be named. And, it was that iron sharpens iron type deal. I think we want to see some of that, see where he can work. If he could shut down, he might not be running with the ones. They may put him out there with the ones, test him, see what happens. Maybe give Joe Hayden a vet day off at some point in camp. And, you may have something of that nature. But I think there's a lot of value to just at least not make that decision until the end of August.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this a little bit in the Pet Peeve show, and it's just there is no benefit to releasing Artie Burns right now. Again, this is a guy that not just the Steelers, but other teams had first-round grade on. Yes, everybody accepted that he was going to be a work in progress and that he needed to improve in certain areas. And again, he seemed to do that over the first couple years, and then he backslid. And that happens. He's still, this is a young kid. Artie, you want to get bent out of shape about Colbert saying kid. This is a kid. Artie Burns is still ridiculously young. And that's a guy who's very young and now has essentially, 3+ years or 3 years in the league, and is going to work through his fourth season. With that being said, I look at what the Steelers did in the offseason and in the draft. And in my mind, I think that they are willing to give Artie Burns the chance to show he still belongs, but in some ways they've moved on in their own head, because they protected themselves from a depth standpoint. They protected themselves, from having to push Burns into a starting role, even if somebody gets hurt. And as a result, I don't know. I don't know what Artie Burns' future with the team is, but I think that it still is pointless to release him at this point. It does you no good, and it's a guy you felt good about at one point in time who did appear to be getting better at one point in time. And if he can come back to that kind of form, that's a good problem to have. At that point, you can try and work something out with him in the offseason to keep him around, and you could have a good problem of having the depth that most teams really don't have. Now, you mentioned the AFC North. As much as I hate saying this, the Ravens probably have the best secondary as far as corners and maybe even safeties in the league. They're in a great position, and it disgusts me. But they also lost a lot of guys off that defensive front, and that can expose your secondary. The Ravens have always had a solid defense. It'll be interesting to see what happens with them this year. I think there's going to be more pressure on that secondary to keep up with receivers when it's possible that the front group is not getting to the quarterback as quickly or as often. So, that's again, it's like the component is partly there, but not all the way there. Same thing with the Bengals. The Bengals have a lot of first-round picks that are sitting in their secondary room. I don't know that they've blossomed the way that anybody thought they would. William Jackson looks like he's going to be a player, but we'll have to wait and see. Again, it's a solid room, and the Browns. Look, Denzel Ward was really good last season. If he can continue to be really good this season, we'll start to talk about him as one of the better corners in the league. But it's 1 year. I'm not going to, as we talked about this in the back room, not ready to anoint this kid after a single season. You got to prove it over continued seasons. And so that, it's not that they couldn't have a fantastic room. Maybe they do. We just don't know yet. But I agree with you. I think the AFC North has gone from a division that, you had maybe the Steelers and the Ravens and maybe just the Steelers that anybody was really worried about, to a division where you've got at least three teams, because I'm sorry, the Bengals are still a train wreck. You've got at least three teams that people have to take seriously. And yes, I think teams have to take the Browns seriously. I'm not sold that they're going to be the champs of the division, not by a long shot, but they showed last year that they had improved, and I don't think you can just say same old Browns anymore. And that's good for the division as a whole. Again, it's that iron battling iron concept. And it would be nice to have the Browns as a real rivalry again instead of just a
they're so obnoxious. They're already talking about winning the Super Bowl already, so I want to dismiss them.
That's why it's good to have them as a rivalry, because then when they don't, we can go ha-ha.
That's always good, and except for when they don't, and it's not ha-ha in Week 17, because they couldn't get over the hump with the Ravens. Thanks a lot, Baker. So anyway, it was like we need it's the lesser of two evils. We need the enemy to defeat another enemy, and it didn't work out. I didn't mention the Rams in this. I know they have Aqib Talib. He's now 33 years old. They have Marcus Peters, who's young, and he's an interception machine. But just on account of that, man, has he not looked like incredibly lazy with tackling and everything else throughout his career?
Yeah.
Like he just doesn't have that focus. And they're making so much money when you compare to what the Steelers are paying. But, you mentioned it. The Browns made some off-season moves. They already had Jarvis Landry. They have that Antonio Callaway, who's a burner, entering his second year as a wide receiver, as long as he can keep focused and catch the ball as well. They have Odell Beckham, obviously, the big trade. And you look across the division, I'm not as worried with the Ravens' core group of players that are there. But when you look at the Bengals, they still have something there. They still have A.J. Green. They have Tyler Boyd, who, believe it or not, had a better statistical season with Andy Dalton and even without him than Jarvis Landry did with the Browns last year. And some people will be like, well, that's because Baker Mayfield didn't start the season. They had Tyrod Taylor. who did the Bengals have? Was it Jeff Driscoll as their quarterback? I mean, I'm actually pulling this up right now because I need to know this. Jeff Driscoll started 5 games last season. Andy Dalton only played 11, and that's why you had Tyler Boyd also throwing passes sometimes. But I mean, Tyler Boyd, he was kind of the man there. I mean, I know AJ Green got hurt. He played 9 games. That's been a thing. He's starting to get snake bitten too. But you have to be able to cover all of these weapons. You obviously think about what the Chiefs have, what the Chargers have, what the Patriots have. These are all teams that should be in the postseason. You have to cover them, and you need all these corners. I know it's not too comforting when you look at Artie Burns, graded 58.6 and completely unranked in the cornerback charts for Pro Football Focus. He actually graded higher than Cam Sutton, but I mean, Cam Sutton didn't play a whole lot of snaps either. And there's not a whole lot else. When you're looking around, you're kind of starting to think, okay, those are the top 4. How's this going to shake out? If Burns makes the roster, maybe that's the top 4. There's also some other players here that deserve a few mentions. There's Brian Allen, a third-year corner. He was a project. He played 1 year at the position in college after converting from wide receiver. He's 6'3", 215. He hasn't barely cracked any playing time. Been mostly a special teams guy throughout his career. There's also the rookie that they drafted out of Michigan State, Justin Lane, 6'2", 192. He is somebody that they're going to develop. If he shows flashes, that's probably the biggest threat to maybe an Artie Burns. But again, the Steelers aren't saving any money by dumping Artie Burns or even having him have a helmet and play some special teams. That's still maybe a help going forward. And let me see, who else? I don't really want to mention all of these camp guys. They're missing, I'm looking at the current roster. Here he is. He's at the very bottom of it. They have him listed as a DB. That's why, not a cornerback. Very interesting. But Cameron Kelly is the gentleman who came out of the Alliance of American Football. I almost forgot the name of it, man. It's now an afterthought. But he played with the San Diego Fleet and was one of the top corners and got to put some stuff on tape there. He has played safety before in his college career, and then he's shifted around. He came out of San Diego State, so he was one of the regional guys. That's why the way their system worked in the AAF, a lot of it was regionally based. So that's why you saw certain players in Birmingham, but others either in what was it, Texas, at San Antonio, the Commanders, and then San Diego. So it was kind of territorial in those rights too. So I don't want anybody to think, well, he was there, this, that. That's how it worked. But he was undrafted. He was on the Cowboys practice squad for a spell last season. Somebody to maybe watch during the draft. And then, he's really a DB. He's kind of going to be a safety. PJ Locke is what we're looking at maybe being a safety out of Texas. So, I mean, that kind of covers the corners there. This may be a 3 dogs, 1 bone situation or 4 dogs, 1 bone situation, depending on how you look at it for the final 1 or 2 spots. I don't think they keep more than 5 cornerbacks, but at the very worst, I mean, you're probably looking at Justin Lane, Brian Allen, and Artie Burns. I would suggest maybe even Cam Sutton. Who knows? Because he's still got 2 years left. I don't know. They might still want to develop him, but that's who you're looking for competing for the final spots. At least one of these men are going to be the odd guy out.
Yeah, and I've been watching what I can of Justin Lane. And I got to tell you that I'm starting to rev up my hype train. The Hive, I'm starting to. I don't even know what I'm talking about, by the way, with these hype trains and Hive things. I just, Zachadonia throws these names out and stuff, and I just absorb them. Anyway, yeah, I'm generating a hive, and the bees are buzzing.
He's our resident millennial with his young people slang. We're just a bunch of old people. You much older man yelling for him to get off your lawn.
Yeah, but the point being, as I see this, and I'm really excited to see Justin Lane in camp, because I have a really good feeling that this is a kid that I think is going to come in and maybe be a sub-package contributor, maybe even be more. I think that the diamond in the rough may be right there.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, I kind of feel the same way too. And everyone was kind of pinpointing whether or not the Steelers would target a cornerback. They felt that was still a need. We both felt that there were maybe greater needs, especially after they signed Nelson. So Justin Lane is someone that some people, didn't the Steelers say they had a first-round grade on him, I believe?
Yes.
Yeah, and you get him in the third round. You never know. I mean, what kind of risk reward is there if you end up with finding someone in the third round that ends up being a starter? Absolutely zero, or some type of contributor. You just never know how he's going to peak until we start to see how he fits into this, how he fits into reps. If he starts stealing reps from someone else, that's kind of where I said he's going to compete with somebody like Brian Allen and Artie Burns, because you're probably going to be looking at who the second team guys are, or if there's someone that's taking a day off. Like I don't know that Joe Hayden gets a lot of days off, but he probably has that privilege. So you're going to be looking at who gets first team reps. Are they going to work Cam Sutton in some first team? Will Justin Lane jump into the second team at some point? He's going to be at the very bottom right now and have to earn it and work his way up, as most of the rookies do when they're in camp. But I do anticipate seeing him get some snaps with the second teams. And as soon as that happens, you know who it's going to be. Who's going to be the casualty or the one that he takes the reps from. And it's going to be Artie Burns, because Artie Burns has already been there and he's already had this exposure and he's already had these reps. So he has to fight his way back and earn it as well. I think it's going to be something that's going to be interesting to see. Just back on the overall show as to whether or not one of the Steelers have one of the top groups or could have one of the top groups in the NFL in 2019. I mean, we mentioned about 10 franchises, maybe a dozen. I mean, there's some on paper, just like the Steelers on paper, that might be better than what you think. And so I think I'm ready to place that, maybe put them into that, provided that, our expectations, what do you want to say? We're not too overreaching on our expectations. I will say at least this much for everyone that thinks that, I'm crazy or, I'm drunk with bias and being a homer here. When you look at some of these other teams, there's no way that they're like 20th or worse when they already weren't and they've added better players.
Yeah, look, we get tagged every now and then with the homer label. We are homers, but we try and be at least moderately objective. And sometimes our fan base or our fanboy side comes out. But we are Pittsburgh Steelers fans. There's no question about that. So, we tend to look on the bright side as opposed to the negative side, unless the negative side becomes so obvious that we cannot help it. And at the same time, acknowledge when there are issues. I don't think it's being overly homerish, though, to look at this group and say it's improved. I'm not, as I said, I'm not ready to anoint them a top, elite unit, because I don't know that top 10 to me is elite.
No, not at all what I'm trying to say. That's why I made that disclaimer.
Absolutely. But I'm also not ready to say that this is the bottom of the barrel where, there were points in time over the last, when you got Antoine, whatever his name is, Blake, and Cortez Allen, you're scraping the bottom at some point. I don't feel like we're in that position at all. I think this is a good group and possibly a very good group, and could, based on who they've got in the room, grow into an elite group.
Yeah, I'm with you all the way on everything that you said there, and I don't know that there's much more to say about that other than, we're just trying to make sure everybody kind of stays on task here, because this has been a group that everyone's been highly critical of. They've been critical of the front office and also the coaching staff as to the players' development and how well they played. Now, just taking a look at that, also, Mike Tomlin gets a lot of flack, right, all the time, but he was the defensive backs coach, and it's the position that they've been, I don't know, miserable maybe at, and a lot of people are just kind of like, what's going on with this? So when you look at what they've done, they added Tom Bradley as the coach. They fired Carnell Lake heading into last year. looks like maybe an improvement, or at least Tom Bradley wasn't, they weren't sticking to their guns with Artie Burns. They realized there was a hole in the ship and it needed plugged. So they put Cody Sensabaugh in there for better or worse. Cody Sensabaugh had always been inconsistent, so I'm glad the Steelers, they've made a lot of realizations here and moved on. But then one of the other realizations is that they brought Terrell Austin in to be a senior defensive assistant for the secondary, because you may have as many as 6 or 7 defensive backs on the field at the same time. They realized, hey, this might be too big of a job for just one coach to handle. And, if you're not familiar with Terrell Austin, he was the defensive coordinator for the Bengals last season, and now they've cleaned house on their coaching staff. He was defensive coordinator for the Lions for a few seasons, and then he was the Ravens secondary coach, and then he flipped back and forth in his career. He's also been with the Seattle Seahawks as the defensive backs coach, and he's been with the Cardinals, Arizona Cardinals too. So for the better part since about, 2003, with one stint at the University of Florida in 2010, aside from that, he's been in the pros working with defensive backs with a variety of different coaching staffs, and they must trust him enough too, because they say they're going to bring him in and kind of be he's going to be in the press box, and he's going to be one of the guys that's going to help assist Tomlin with replay this year as well. So there is a culture change. There is a focus on making sure that the corners or the defensive backs as a whole are a lot better, and certainly the talent kind of suggests that they should be. So I don't know. I don't have much else to say about that other than just hold your horses on releasing any more players unless there's something that comes along the line. Let's just say, for example, that somebody that we, somewhat disparaged here, like an Artie Burns, gets all the way through camp and does make the 53. It still doesn't mean his job's going to be safe through that next week in week 1, depending on the other roster cuts that happen around the league as well. So it's just something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. There is one thing I want to address. There's a burgeoning controversy that has been first brought up in our comment section. I'm going to call it Lip Smack Gate.
Oh, is it me? Am I lip smacking?
No, I think it's me.
Oh.
And I don't know, but this is the thing. I salivate so much at the concept of the Steelers, and I'm so hungry for football. I can't help it. It's lip smacking good, man. That's what it is lip smacking good. I'm sorry. I'll try and control my lip smacking nature. It is.
I do try to get some of that edited out, and sometimes we even say, and it's like everybody, hold us our feet to the fire. All you got to do is listen to like Westwood One or ESPN Radio talk in the middle of the day, and there's quite a bit of that when you're just doing this off the cuff with anybody that does the live stuff. If you really pay attention to it, they do the same stuff. Now I've called us out, and everybody's going to say the same thing. Oh, well, you do, and it's like, well, okay, but you know what? Compared to most, I don't think I'm that brain dead. So we do appreciate you. We appreciate you for listening. We don't mind the feedback most of the time. I actually have been loving it lately. So absolutely. So thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting the show. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe no matter where you are. We also love our reviews over on iTunes as well, if you happen to, or Apple Podcasts, however they brand that now. They keep changing it. If Google can figure out what they're doing, we'll know what to call theirs too. So, and once again, thanks for joining me, Brian.
Always a pleasure. Love being here. Love talking to you. Love the Steelers. And I'm just, I'm in a joyous mood because it's a sunny day.
That's always a good thing. So it's good wherever you're listening. Enjoy the day, folks. And until next time, my name's Joe. His name's Brian. We encourage all of our listeners to always be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.